React 19 is making a lot of buzz. From the time of its announcement till now, when it is in release candidate or RC, developers around the globe are trying out different features of React 19. They're trying to understand what it is about, and they're trying to understand how is it probably going to help them in the long run if they're a React developer. So I started exploring about React 19 a while back, and then I thought, okay, it will be a great thing to learn along with all of you. So here is a video where I'm going to take you through all the features that React 19 promises. And along with that, I'm also going to explain how is it going to help you or impact you as a React developer. Whether you are a developer, you're working in a company, or you are an employer who are trying to hire a React developer. I think you need to know what exactly React 19 having in its kitty and what it is going to offer. So without any further delay, let's react. How much of a version change really matter when you are learning a library or a framework? Yes, it matters. If there are changes which are really awesome, if there are changes which could be breaking, if there are changes that are going to change the way you used to think about that library or the framework. React 19 is one such. It has a lot of features that are included. Also, it is going to change the way you used to work and used to program with React earlier. In this video, we are going to touch base with all the features, everything that you need to know about React 19, and we are going to go horizontally. It means that we are going to touch base on all the features, going to learn what they are, going to see code examples, going to see the differentiation between how it used to be before versus how it is going to be in React 19. But we are not going to get into the depth of each of those features. The depth on each of those features will be the subsequent videos. For example, if I have to talk about React compiler in completely depth, that will be the next video. So this video, please pay attention on going horizontally, learn everything about the features, see the code examples, be excited about it. And in the subsequent videos, we'll be doing hands-on coding, project building on each of this topic. How does it sound to you? Let's talk a bit about React. As you know, React is a user interface library that encourages component architecture. The yellow boxes you see on the screen represents each of the components. And in the components, these blue dots are the state, that is the private data to a component. And this red and orange dot you see over here, these are the props. Through props, two components interact with each other. That's one of the way where two components can talk to each other. There are other ways like centralized state management or through context APIs. Also, component can pass data from one to another. So this overview of React must be known to most of you, but if you are getting started with React just now, I have this playlist where you can get started with React with a lot of fundamental knowledge. Please check it out. The link to the playlist is in the description of this video already. When we are talking about React, we have to talk about some history of it. Way back in 2013, when React initially came, since then, there are a lot happened with React. The 18.2 version was in 2022, and we have seen lot of features of React, like it is component based, it's declarative, there is a virtual DOM, the JSX of it, then the functional component from the class components, then the hooks, then we had suspense, error boundary, memoization, concurrency, like this lot of features. And very recently, we got React 19 RC that happened in mid-May, and this is where we are going to talk about React 19 and its features. So what are those features? We are going to talk about React compiler. This is something got introduced along with React 19, and we'll see like how React compiler fits into React 19, whether it works only with React 19 or it can work with the previous version and all these things. We're going to talk about server components. We're going to see something called actions. These are all features of React 19. We're going to see like how document metadata gets managed in React 19 and how exactly it is going to help you. We're going to talk about a lot of enhanced hooks that got introduced in React 19 and the responsibility of each of those. We're going to talk about ref as props. That's the idea that you need to get into all the React developers. We're going to talk about asset loading and web components management as well. So yeah, there are a lot of features to talk about. So let's get started with the first one, which is React compiler, and let's see that how it is going to impact you as a developer and what are the things that you need to keep in mind. Hey, you don't want to miss any content on tapaScript, so please subscribe and if possible join tapaScript as a member so that you don't miss out on the perks like early access to my videos and more stuff around that. All right, so get started with React compiler first. React compiler is an open source opt-in compiler for React projects, especially designed to work with React 19. It is experimental because React 19 is still in RC and this is getting cooked along with it. It is open source. It means that you can go ahead and start looking into what is happening all around React compiler and if possible can contribute as well. But wait, I'm talking about it is opt-in. What does opt-in means? It means that you can still work with React 19 projects. It is going to work for you without React compiler as well. So React compiler is kind of outside of React 19 as such, but it is always recommended and advisable that you opt in for React compiler, you integrate React compiler with your React 19 code base so that you can take advantage of lot of optimizations that otherwise you are taking care by yourself as a developer. And that's a headache. If you leave that headache to React compiler and it optimizes the code by itself, that is going to be lot performant and it is going to make your code lot cleaner as well. You want to see that? Let's see that with an example and a code flow so that you can start appreciating React compiler a lot. The code you're seeing on your screen right now is a very basic React component. It's called product page, which takes two props. One is called products, a list of product, and a heading text. After getting these two props, what we are doing here, we are calling a method called getFeatured, which takes the list of products and return back what are the featured products to show on the product page. We are also taking out the total number of products by doing products.length. Then on the JSX, we have three child component. One is called heading, another is called product list, and another one is called featured products. The heading component takes two props. This is the heading props which is coming into the parent component itself. This heading one we are directly passing over here. And also we are passing total products so that we can show on the product page at the top a heading along with the total number of products that user are going to see on that particular page. Very simple heading, a header. Then there is a product list which takes this products which is coming as a props to product page. The same props we are passing to the product list. And then there is a featured products which is taking featured products as a props, and here the value of this prop is featured products which we have computed from this products part. So it is a very simple product page where we're showing a heading with the product number, like how many products are there, and then the list of products, and below what are the products that we have considered as a featured for particular day. That's it. Now, if I want to do a component architecture of this particular page, like how these components are going to talk to each other, how they are doing data passing and all these things, how is it going to look like? So consider this is the product page, and this product page has three child. One is heading, product list, and the featured products that we have seen in the JSX part. Now let us see the data passing aspect of it. On the product page, we are passing products and heading as props. From product page, we are getting the headings and the total products as the props to heading component, and then the products is going to the product list component and the featured products going to the featured products component. We have seen this in the code at the left side. Now the twist in the story. What happens usually with React applications? Let's say now this heading changes and this heading changes dynamically from the outside. If this heading changes, that means this prop change, and as the prop change, this product page re-renders. As the product page re-renders, what happened basically, it is going to re-render all the child component. Now the heading gets re-rendered, the product list gets re-rendered, the featured products gets re-rendered. Now there is a problem, right? And this is what probably we are crying as a React developer, like why there is unnecessary re-rendering to the component, which is really not depending on the effect that is causing this re-render. For example, product list and the featured products is not at all accepting this heading props. The heading props is being accepted only in the heading component. Then why the changing of heading is re-rendering the product list and the featured products? This was the case, and to resolve this there are a couple of things happen. React did something which is really fascinating and really powerful. What are those? React introduced something called react.memo, through which you can actually cache the entire component and its behavior in a way that unless the input to the component, the effect to the component is changing, you don't have to re-render that particular component. For product list, products is the one that actually if changes, we have to change the product list, we have to re-render the product list. So unless products changes, the input changes, you don't have to really re-render product list. And if you pass this particular guy inside this react.memo, it will ensure that it happens. So here you have done an amount of optimization already. There are other ways as well. As we know, there is something called use memo, right? So for example, this get featured, if we put at the back of use memo and say that, hey, until unless your this dependency products gets changed, you really don't have to recompute this get featured and don't have to give me the latest value of get featured, because this get featured is depending on this product's array, and if this array is not changing, you don't have to do this to me. So this way also, now if the heading changes, we are not changing the products as such. So it means that neither a product list nor featured products is going to re-render, because we have safeguarded them using React memo and use memo. So this React memo, use callback, all this introduction was great, but what we have seen in the last few years is like the overuse of them. There might not be a great need for those use memo, use callback or React memo, but we are using it thinking that it might give us a great benefit, and we are over optimizing things. Now, as it is given to the developers, it is up to us. But think about a case that this kind of optimization is inbuilt into the ecosystem of React. And this is where React compiler comes into picture. If you opt in for React compiler is going to make sure that it is doing all this kind of optimization, memoizations, and all these aspects, so that you don't have to use React memo at all. You don't have to use memo at all, use callback at all. You write your code the way that you have been writing, you pass your data the way that you thought of passing. React compiler at the background is going to do the job and make sure that it is proper, it is handled in a proper way. How does it sound? It sounds fascinating to me. Do you want to learn more about React compiler? Do you want to see the code, like how exactly it is changing? That's where the next video, where we'll be getting into the deeper of React compiler and try to understand by writing similar kind of product page and see, like, with or without React compiler, how things behave and how exactly these things are happening internally. We can also make use of React compiler along with the older version of React, for example React 18.x. But for that, there are few extra steps need to be done. So if you're curious about that, how would you make it useful with the older version of React, if at all you have that use case, we are going to cover that as well in the next video. Stay tuned to that, and don't forget to subscribe to tapaScript. All right, so one more thing, as I mentioned that React compiler is open source, so nothing stopping you from looking into what is going on with React compiler and if possible even contribute to it. So please go to that, and the link to that particular project is already in the description of this video, so you can check out anytime. Let's move into the next one. Now the next feature of React 19 is my personal favorite. It's called server components. And if you're following tapaScript, you know that I have created a video on server components already, where I have explained that in depth with all the reasons like why server components are great if you are using it properly for the proper use cases. Your use case could be regarding SEOs. You want to improve the SEO, the search engine optimizations technique for your pages. You don't want to download a lot of libraries on your client side and want to do computation. You want to make sure the UX, the loading of your pages, and all these aspects are really great. You will be going for server components, and in React 19 the server components are being introduced. However, if you're using Next.js, the Next.js framework which is built on React already, there the server components are the de facto, are the default one that you must be using already. To understand server components, let's understand the client server thing. So you have clients, usually your desktop, your laptop, your phone, tablet, etc., from where you have a browser or you have the application access capability. And then there are something which is called server, which is lying somewhere, over the network. You make the call from the client to server, you make a request, and once the request has been processed, you get back the response and your UI works. That's how basically the client and server works, based on the request response model. And this is probably 45,000 feet view of a client server thing. Now, how in general the client components work in case of React, the client side rendering part of it. Let's imagine that you have this component hierarchy, and in the server component video, I have taken the same example in one of the portions, so you must be familiar to it if you have seen that video already. So there is a course wrapper, a component at the top, and inside course wrapper there are two other child component called course list and testimonial. And now you assume that all three components are making network call. That means that they're making API call, and once that API response is ready, that response is received by these respective components, and then they are doing the rendering part. So course wrapper, course list, testimonial, all three are making the network call. So on the client side, I have this course wrapper, and then somewhere inside I have this testimonial. Let's imagine that. Okay. Now I am having a server and I am making this particular request from the course wrapper, and this response is taking so long, and finally the response has come. Now until the response was arrived, the rendering part of course list and the testimonials are not happening. What if testimonial calls takes a shorter amount of time than the course wrapper call? What if the response of the testimonials come back much faster? Even though you cannot really guarantee that how much a network call is going to take, because that is depending on various factors, could be the latency, could be your network speed and all these things. But still, if you imagine that the course wrapper call is really much longer than the testimonials call, and even if the testimonials call has finished, it has to wait for its rendering because the course wrapper just now coming, then the testimonial comes and this testimonial comes into picture. So you see a kind of UX that gone for a toss, because you might be seeing some amount of layout shifting, you might be seeing some kind of network waterfall, and thus you will be seeing kind of latency higher. So this is where we tend to see with client components in general. And also another thing that I mentioned, like in client components case, you will be downloading all the necessary libraries and the code on your customers or the user's browser to do all kind of responsiveness or the working factors of your UI. Now let's talk about server components, how it is different. Same client, you have same two components, one parent component, one child component, you have same server. But here is a difference, a remarkable difference is that instead of putting them at the client side, the components, now we are moving towards the server. As we are moving the components towards the server, it means the server and the data from which the component has to fetch is co-located. So it means if there is a request from the client, now as these components are already at the server side, it can actually perform this request response quite faster, and then the baked component finally get back to, and you have this course wrapper, course list or the testimonial being rendered almost at the same time. The components are moved to the server much more near to your data access layer or your databases or the data store, and the components are fully baked with the data, and then coming to your client side, only the interactiveness where you need a button click or any kind of user interaction, that is what you are leaving out to your client components. Up next, let's move to actions or the form actions. Let's talk about actions. To be precise, server actions. What are server actions and how is it related to form? Isn't it form related to client side, but we're talking about actions or the server actions? Let's get into it. Here is a traditional form, and in this form, I have something called onSubmit. On submit, I am calling a function which is called perform search. And here I have an input text box and there is a button which is of type submit. We have seen this kind of form in HTML and plain old JavaScript itself. You don't need React, you don't need React 19 and all those things. Now what happened really? When you click on this submit button, this particular function gets called, because this is saying that on submit this function has to get called. And what is this function doing? It can create the form data from these fields. For example, whatever you have typed into the search box, it can read that particular value. Then it can perform the client side search, or it can make a call to the server by using an API or whatever, right? This is what we have seen. But now with React 19, you have something more powerful. Instead of doing all these things at your client side, now you can move the actions or all these computations to the server side itself, and you can utilize the forms attribute, the regular attribute, which is called action. So with form action, now you will be able to call a similar kind of function, which is we call a action function, because you are using form action attribute and this particular function name. But this function will reside at the server side as long as you annotate this particular function with a new directive called useServer. This directive is mandatory to tell React that, hey React, this particular piece is not an ordinary function. This particular piece is going to be an async function, because it is going to take care of the asynchronous call, and this will be executed on the server. This is not going to execute on the client. And this is a huge boost, because some of the use cases like sending an email, downloading an PDF, or doing certain kind of invoice calculations at the background, all these things now you can do in form of a server action. Think about the case that you have a form where you are having an input box and you want to get your subscribers email ID, and after that submitting that particular form, you want to subscribe that particular email ID to your account and send them an email. You don't want to do all that operation in the client side. Rather, now you have the server action through which you can perform that. So if you compare these two, in this case everything is happening in the client side. If you see this one, you are writing a server action. Before React 19, if you try to do this, things won't be working. In React 19 alone, this will be working, and that is where this particular directive use server has been introduced. Here, one thing very important: use server, this directive you will be using only for server action. Don't imagine that use server directive is to call a React component as a server component. No, it is there in React documentation very clearly that the use server directive is only for the server action. Use client directive is only for the client component. For server component, you don't have to annotate it with any kind of directive. So there are only two directives: use server, use client. Use server for server action, use client for the client component. Hope this is clear. Document meta, what it is? So when you are developing an application, you have few meta information that you want to provide for your application. For example, application's title, the description for that application, maybe an OG image, different kind of social cards like for the X, LinkedIn, and all these things, right? So now to do all this stuff, you have to provide that within your code, and you have to manage it throughout in your code. Before React 19 came in, if you had to set a title of your application dynamically, believe me, it was a lot of code that you will be writing unnecessarily. Now, why do you want to need this document meta? So one of the big reason I would say SEO. Now, if you want your application to be searched using its title or any text that is there in the description, I think you would be giving title and descriptions. And then it is also advisable to give the OG images, so that when you are sharing the link of your application on the social media, it also come up with that beautiful image that takes out your brand value, right? Now let's see first, without React 19, how would you change the title and the description of your application dynamically? So this is the code, though it is like 4 or 5 lines, but still it is something that you are writing by yourself. You're doing this computation by yourself, and you're managing and maintaining this code. So you're doing document.title, you're putting this title, and if you have to put a new title that you're getting through the props or something, you can add that over here. Along with that, you have to do document.querySelector. This is where you are getting into the DOM and the DOM querying by yourself, though React is declarative where you should not be touching the DOM as much as possible. And then if the meta description tag is available, then you are setting it. So it means you are now mutating the DOM. You are updating the DOM by yourself. This is something again you should not be doing by yourself, because React is declarative. So this is why React 19 is special. In React 19, things are so simpler. You have title, you have meta, and with meta you have attributes like descriptions and all other things like your Twitter card, your OG, and all this stuff, where you just provide the value that you need to. You don't have to do all this JavaScript, you don't have to do all this use effect, all this extra thing to take care of your document metadata. It is being managed organically in React 19, and I'm sure that this is what you are going to enjoy a lot. Now we are getting into more serious parts. We are going to talk about enhanced hook. If you are a React developer, you like hooks. That's a great paradigm that got introduced in React, and we are now quite familiar in writing hooks, understanding hooks. In React, now we have a bunch of hooks that are introduced, or the APIs that have got introduced, and a few that you won't be using much. So we know about use memo, we know about use callback, we know about React memo, and we know why we won't be using it. Because if you are using React compiler, you won't be needed to use these hooks at all. React compiler is going to take care of it. Instead, there are few new things. For example, use, a great API that you have now. Then you have useFormStatus, which works more closely with form. Like this, there are two more called useFormState, use optimistic. Let us understand each of this hook so that we know that what are the use cases for each of this, but each of these hooks demand their independent video tutorial. That is what I'm going to represent in front of you in a while in the successive videos of this series. So let's go and start with use. What is use? Use is an API. I won't consider this as a hook as such. I call it as an API. The primary use of use is like if you have a promise, you can pass a promise to this particular hook, and this is going to resolve this promise and provide you the outcome so that you can work with this outcome directly. Now, when you are talking about promise, we are definitely talking about the asynchronous call, async function, and asynchronous way of dealing with things. In React, traditionally, whenever we are talking about asynchronous way of doing things, we know there is something called use effect. Here on your screen, the code that you are seeing is a product list component where we are making an API call to get the products, and then we are going to list out those products through our JSX. Very simple React component. Now, you have been writing this use effect. I have been writing this use effect for years with reactjs. But the problem is there are a lot of gotchas around use effect. If you want to really write use effect at a completely neat way, making sure all its dependencies, all the cleanup, everything is taking in place, your use effect is definitely not going to be this much number of line of code that you are seeing. It is going to be much more than that. So managing this effect, managing the effect in this way, it's quite cumbersome. But what is happening at the background of it? You are making a fetch call. That means you will be having a promise that is either get resolved or rejected. If the promise get resolved out of the fetch, you have to get the actual data through JSON. So you'll be getting another promise either getting resolved or rejected. If it is resolved, then you are getting the data back. If either of the cases the promises get rejected, you are having into this error block, getting it caught over here, and you're showing, okay, there is an error happen. Now, to do these things, you need this use effect, but with React 19, you don't need use effect. Rather, we'll be using it much more cleanly using something called use, this API. So you see use over here, we have passed a function called fetch products to this particular use API. This fetch products returns nothing but a promises, and it can come from a server component. Now, after getting this one, use is going to resolve this particular promise. If the promise resolves successfully, you will get the data back directly. If the promise is giving any kind of rejection and error, you will end up in getting the error that you need to handle it over here. Hence, the use API is quite useful for us so that we don't have to really take care of the effect by ourselves, rather pass the promises and get the data out. So as you're seeing, after getting the products, what we are doing over here, we are mapping it through, and then we are creating this product card. Now this product list we have to use, right? This product list can be used within the error boundary using the suspense. I have a video where I have explained suspense and error boundary. Again, that video link is in the description of this video. Now here what we are doing, we are using this particular product list component directly, right? Using a suspense and fallback, saying that when this asynchronous call is happening, when this promise is getting resolved or promise is getting rejected, I can show a loading indicator. This can be a component itself which can show any kind of shimmer effect or the loading. I'm showing it is loading products. If there is something wrong happen, I'm catching it through the error boundary. I'm showing like something went wrong in case of error case. So if you see the left side versus right side, the use effect versus the use API as such, you see that use API is much cleaner now. And you can actually forget using use effect. You don't have to if you start adapting use in React 19. And my recommendation would be definitely start using use API in React 19, and I'm going to show you a few examples in the use API video in this series, so please stay tuned to that. The another use case of it is use API is going to simplify the usage of the context API in React 19. In case of React so far, we have this use context hook, we have the context provider, we have the context, and then the provider, we provide the information through use context. We can get the context wherever we require in the component hierarchy. Now that is also a lot of code that we need to write. But if you have the context ready, now that context you can pass directly to this use API, which is going to give you back the data that you have stored in the context. For example, the current theme and the function to switch or toggle the theme. So this is another way your usage of context is going to be very, very simplified in React 19. We are going to see this example as well in the use API video that's coming in future. All right, so let's move on to other hooks. Now, the next three hooks we are going to talk about, those are related to form and the server actions. So pay attention to those. Again, I'll be keeping those at a high level because each of those hooks demand their own videos where I can explain them with projects and the code flow in the right way. But right now in this video, as we're talking about overview, please try to understand them. What is their purpose, how they're going to help you, so that in the upcoming videos you will be able to accept them much better way. The first hook is called useFormStatus. Now with the name we can guess that is going to talk about the status of the form. No, it is going to talk about status of the form submission. Now with server action, as we know that we are dealing with the asynchronous operation. That means you are making a call and you really don't know when you get the response back. Now from the hitting of the submit button until the point when you get the response back, you have to let your users know that something is happening. All right, one way of doing it is like showing some kind of loading indicator, all these things, but those are olden days UI. Right now, what do you want to do? Maybe you have something like this. You have a user form and in there you have user form fields. Let's consider that you have a bunch of form fields and a submit button inside this user form fields component. And there is an action called fetch user where you want to fetch the user and do something about it. Now in the user form fields where your submit button is there, instead of keeping the user on hold or showing up page level loading, you want to show on the button itself that your form is being submitted or fetching user some kind of messages. How are you going to do that? How would you know that your form is now in the pending state? How would you know that your form has not got the response back through a server action? That's where exactly the use form status comes into picture. You have to import the use form status hook from the React DOM, and this is the same user form fields component. This is little bit illustrated over here. What we are doing, we have a button. This is the submit button, and you see that I can get the status from the use form status directly. Here I am checking if the status is pending. I am disabling the buttons so that I don't want my users to click on that button again and again when the submission is in progress. And I'm also saying that submitting or the submission is in progress, whatever it is, otherwise the button text is just get users. So this improves the usability a lot where you don't have to block the user from the overall page level, rather at the button level or the interaction level only you can manage the UX. Now let's understand what use form status gives us. Now use form status gives us these things. It gives us a state called pending, and then it gives us data, it gives us method, and it gives us action. This pending is a Boolean factor, so it means that if it is true, the form is in pending submission. The data is the form data that we get, the submitted data. If there are other fields other than the submit button in this particular form, then it will be giving us more thing. Let's imagine that the button is enclosed with the form and there are other fields as well. In this case, the form is already there. Let's imagine that there are other fields inside this. Now the method, HTTP methods like get or post, and the action. This is the reference to this particular action method, which is the fetch user in this case. From use form status also you get a reference to this particular action as well if you want to do anything with it over here. Now with this understanding, let us see visually like how things will take place. So for example, if you had a form like this, say tapas@email.com, you have given as an email ID and the password. When you say submit, until the call happen, it takes place, the asynchronous call completes, you can check the pending state of it, whether if it is true, and checking that you can turn this one to submitting. And once you get back the data, you can do your business logic. You can go to the next page, you can show a toast message, whatever you want to do. So that about the use form status hook, a very handy one. I'm sure you really like using it. Now we'll be moving to the next one, which is called use form state. The name is almost similar. One is status, another is state. Status is simple, mostly to do about the submission status. State is very handy when you want to take care of, say, a lot of validations and all other stuff. Use form state takes a few parameters, two mandatory one. One is a function, another is the initial state, another is a permalink, which is an optional parameter. We're going to talk about it in a moment. And it returns a new state and a form action. But what are the definition of it? Let's say in your form, you have an email ID and the password field, and you want to validate that your password must be 8 characters long. Now, that validation logic you can put into this particular function and give it to the useFormState with the initial state where you can say that password validation message colon empty string. That means you don't have any message. Now from the function which you have a validator function, from which you can return the new state which can say, hey, if it is not 8 character, then the message should be your password must be 8 characters at least. So that state you get over here. And you also get the form action that you can pass it to your forms action attribute. So if you see the definition, this fn is a function to be called when the form is submitted. That is where you can keep a lot of validation logic. Initial state, the initial state of the value. Permalink is an optional attribute which helps in unique page URL that this form modifies. We'll talk about this in depth when you go for the useFormState video in future. We'll see the usage of each of this thing. But at a high level, try to know like what each of these things mean and what are they doing. And in return, I get a state back and I get a form action back, a new action that you can now pass it to the action prop of the form, regular one, and the state. Once an action is invoked, it will reflect the return value of the action, right? So this is what it is about. Now, if we see it, how we can actually reflect this in our UI. From here to here, we have seen it in the useFormStatus. From here to here, as you are seeing that I am performing a validation now on my one of the field, and I'm seeing that the validation message over here that password must be 8 characters long through the state change. My initial state for this password value would have been something else, and the message over here would have been something else, maybe an empty string or something. But as this is getting triggered, my useFormState is now going to return me a new state. Through the state, I can show like what is the password validation message, that it must be 8 characters long, or whatever my business logic or the logic is, right? So this is very handy. If you are already using something called React Hook Form, that library, you must be using things like this already, but now it is integrated with React 19. And the last one, useOptimistic. So there is something called optimistic form update. So again, when you are making asynchronous call, you're waiting for your network response to come back. One way is like checking the submission status and making that button as pending and also showing user as pending. You might want to optimistically update your form. What does it mean? You might want to tell your users in stages of the submission like what exactly happening to your form actions, and this is where you can change the messages on every stages till you get back the response. Let's see that in practice. So we have a hook now called useOptimistic, and this hook takes two parameters. One is called state, another called update function, and it returns something called an optimistic state and an optimistic function. So let's understand what are each of these. This state is as usual an initial state. So if you have used use state and hook like that, we pass an initial state, right, in that. So similar to that, there is an initial state that you can pass, and then you have an update fn. This take the current state. So in the first time, initial state itself, and the value that you pass to this add optimistic and return an optimistic value. So this add optimistic, the definition of it or the implementation of it, that you need to take care. And it is completely depending on what is your use case and your logic that you want to return to. We are going to see that in a moment in a pictorial manner. For now, let's imagine that you have an update fn. The update fn take two parameters, the current state and the value passed to an add optimistic and return an optimistic value. This is the optimistic state value. Optimistic state, the returning the optimistic state value, and add optimistic is a dispatching function to call when you have optimistic update. For example, when you do a submission of a form. So how does it look like? Again, look into this particular picture. From here to here, we have taken care of it using the status part of it. That is where we are turning the submit to submitting. But this is an asynchronous call. It is taking a longer. You might also had a validation with the state hook, which we have seen before, but with optimistic hook, you can optimistically update like what is going on. You see here over here, we have an optimistic message one. After a while, still the submission is going on. You are seeing the submitting is over here till the submission is going on, it is not complete, you can again update your user with another message like optimistic message 2. Now, if you want to tie this optimistic message 1 and the optimistic message 2 with each of these properties, this is what it would look like. Initially, the state is probably null or state is empty. So why you don't have any optimistic message. But after certain point of time, certain actions happen or certain things happen in your business logic or the use cases, you wanted to add one optimistic message. That is why you will be calling this add optimistic. And this add optimistic would dispatch a function. I explained this over here that it takes the current state, which is initially blank, and the value passed to the add optimistic, that is your logic, and it will return an optimistic state. There it might be optimistic message 1. You want to tell user something. So again, use optimistic also we are getting into and diving into by creating project, creating the functionality. So stay tuned to that. Though we are saying React is declarative, still in some cases you might have to change and take charge on DOM, right? The DOM directly in an imperative way. And on those cases, you would have used something called ref. Now, the usage of ref is useful when you want to say set a focus on an input box or get a particular DOM element access and want to do something with it. And again, when you wanted to pass the ref in the component hierarchy, you use something called a forward ref. Now, good news is that the forward ref is no more required in React 19. In React 19, you can pass the ref as direct props as you are doing with your data. Let's see that. This is how we have been doing this forward ref thing, right? So we have a fancy button and we want to pass this ref to the child component. Let's say this on to this button. So we'll be doing a forward ref and pass the ref to it. This forward ref, the understanding of it and the usage of it is no more required in React 19. In React 19, you can pass the ref directly like a props, like any other children or any other data, and can use it directly. So which is a great improvement. You don't have to really learn and understand one more extra thing. You can do it in a normal way with ref as well. Yeah, that's not all. We have more. React 19 offers more feature, and one of the feature is about asset loading. So what happens is like when your view renders, after your view renders, you also see the style sheets gets loaded. Then you have the fonts, then you have the images, and this sequence might cause some kind of flickering. And if this flickering happen in your UI, your user experience may go for a toss, right? And if you're on a slower network where your images or the fonts or the styles are getting loaded bit slowly, you will be feeling this flicker much more. Now React 19 is going to take away that pain from you. React 19 is going to offer you certain resource loading APIs like preload, pre-init and all this case. That is going to give you a super duper control on your asset loading. So it will load a lot of things in the background. So as a user, you don't have to really worry about any kind of flickering. React is also introducing a lifecycle suspense for asset loading. I think that's going to be a game changer because that particular feature will enable React to identify like what is the content which is ready and now we need to kind of display. So that will eliminate all this kind of style flickering and it will be much better experience for our end users. The last thing is about web components. What are web components? I think web components are fascinating things and it is not sold as heavily as any other library or framework. Imagine that with raw HTML, raw JavaScript, you are going to create functionalities and make them available like another HTML tag. That's pretty awesome. So you should be able to create something really crazy and kind of use that using an HTML tag kind of stuff, and that is reusable. You can use it across your multiple projects. So that's where web components are so powerful feature. Now, traditionally, when you want to bring web components to the reactjs ecosystem, it is little bit tricky. You have to either wrap that into reactjs paradigm or you have to use some external libraries. There are always integration challenges between React and the web components. So React 19 promises to remove that challenge and promises to make it available much more smoothly. I am yet to explore this part of it with React 19. So far, whatever I spoken about, like till the hooks, all the hooks, everything that I've explored, created projects. So I'm going to teach you as I'm learning. But for the font loading, style loading or, asset loading or web components, these are the aspects I have not explored yet, but I'm definitely going to explore and teach you along with it, right? So web components is another way where React 19 promising that they are going to make it much smooth and easy to integrate. And if that happens, I think it will be a different era for web components that is going to come. People are going to use web components much heavily and correct way. I encourage you to explore React 19 along with me if you're not doing it already. Now to do that, I have created a simple project where you can fork it and start writing your React 19 code straight away. This is a very simple project. What it has is basically in its package.json, it is using the React 19 React DOM, their RC version, the required TypeScript support and all these things. So you can just fork it and start writing the React 19 code as you would like to. In the subsequent videos where I'll be writing code and doing project with React 19, I'll be using the same project. So if you're also using it along with me, we'll be on the similar infrastructure. If you don't want to use that, also perfectly fine. In that case, you install React 19 RC manually and all of its TypeScript support, and then start writing React 19 code. That also perfectly fine. So that's it. We are at the end of this video. I hope you found this informative. And if you are somebody who is just getting started with React, so I would again suggest that start with the playlist from the beginning. I have created a lot of videos with the broken mic and the broken camera in the beginning, like how I was learning, I started teaching. The same thing applies for React 19 as well. I have a lot of enthusiasm about it. And if you don't want to miss out that enthusiasm, wanted to go along with it, please subscribe to tapaScript, and also please join me as a member so that you can take advantage of all the perks that I provide. So take care of yourself. Very soon I'll be coming up with the React compiler video where we'll be getting in depth with React compiler, build project, build things, and start seeing the real story behind React compiler. All right, see you at the other side.